fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and Miss Jennifer Ann Gordon is here today.
You actually called me by my entire name and not Peaches today. So
no, not Peaches. This is serious.
I'm honored. It is serious. I was going to say, if you introduce me as Peaches and then we introduce our legendary guests, it's going to diminish me.
Yeah,
thank you.
This is a serious one. We're talking
serious. This is
real stuff. We had to use your serial killer name, the three-name Jennifer Ann Gordon, right?
Exactly. The head injury as a child, blah, 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 the serial killer triad name. Yeah, thank you.
You shouldn't feel bad because Doug and I call each other Rosemary and Thyme, so,
Oh, what can I say?
I love it already.
Yeah, so here we go. Now we're going to be talking about a new book called Angel of Vengeance. So, Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, thank you for being here.
Our pleasure.
Great to be here.
Well, guys, it's been a little while. Does it ever get old when you've done so many books and they're all quite successful and this is already a #1 bestseller and you're all happy? So, does it ever get boring? I guess that's a terrible word, but does it ever get kind of mundane in the sense that you do it so much and so you're like Lady Gaga here? So, Doug, what's going on? How do you like it?
Well, it's funny. I love writing these books. They're really fun to write. Lincoln and I have a lot of fun writing them and dreaming them up, and we hope our readers have the same amount of fun reading them. I never get bored with Lincoln. He's a man full of many surprises, and sometimes he'll turn in some chapters he's written, and I'll be absolutely horrified. I mean, he shocks me even now. The twisted nature of his mind. I mean, he looks so nice and so mild looking on the surface, but when with pen in hand, watch out.
Just don't turn your back on him. Don't be alone in a room. Is that it?
Yes, that's right. And please don't say that we're bored because this is a ho-hum #1 bestseller. We don't know yet whether it's #1 bestseller. So, we can only be so lucky as to be bored when we learn that information. But we hope so.
Yeah. So writing is really kind of, that may sound corny, but you actually do it for the writing. Like the story itself is still the key thing that you guys do here more than anything else. Is that kind of how you put it, Lincoln?
Yes. I used to be an editor at St. Martin's for many years, and it gave me a sense when a manuscript crossed my desk of whether it was written by a complete amateur but with a good heart, or if it was written by an amateur that really knew how to write just naturally. And then there were all the editors around me who were cynically saying, "I've learned all the tricks to writing the great American novel, and I'll get around to it when I have time, and it'll be a #1 bestseller because I know every trick in the trade." And of course, that's 100% the wrong way to go about it because everyone's going to see through it. It'll never work. Our readers are very smart people, and so Doug and I do it completely for the love of it. And every book, this most recent book, I think we probably worked harder on than just about any other, despite our increasing decrepitude. So it's a labor of love, and we never phone it in. If we ever had to stop, I think it would just be because we couldn't, not because we didn't want to.
I'm always so impressed when I speak to authors who have been working with the same characters for so many years. How do you keep the characters fresh, and do the characters ever to this day do things that surprise you? Doug, why don't you take this one first?
Well, yeah, the characters, our famous character is Special Agent Pendergast, and in fact, Paramount is now making a television series based on him in our books. But he continually surprises us. He seems to have an existence outside of our own minds. I mean, the way he originally came to us is kind of mysterious. We were writing our first book, Relic, and I had written the first few chapters, and I sent them to Link, and he called me up and said, Doug, these are really nice chapters, but you've got these two cops, an Irish cop, an Italian cop, and they're essentially the same character, and what we need, he said, is a detective like no other. And of course, by this point, I was really irritated. And I said sarcastically, oh, like what we need is like an albino FBI agent from New Orleans. And Link said, well, you know, let's run with that. We started talking, and of course, Pendergast is not albino, but he's just very pale. And so he's pale, we gave him a black suit. He said when he shows up at the crime scene, people think he's the coroner. And on it went. And in about half an hour, this character was standing in front of us, AXL Pendergast. And that was 35 years ago, and he surprises us every day since. I can't explain it. It's like he is more real to us than many of the actual real people we know.
You remember a time when, this is dating me, but all the TV detectives had some kind of problem. Ironside was in a wheelchair, and somebody else was blind, and then the ultimate was that guy in the bone collector who couldn't even get out of bed. And Pendergast has his own, I don't know if you'd call them issues, but they are the result of Doug and I writing a book we wanted to, never being certain it would be published. In fact, if we were being honest, assuming it wouldn't be published, but indulging ourselves with the most eccentric and fun and bizarre hero we could think of. And he's been ever since, he's been sort of directing us rather than us directing him.
So, Lincoln, why did you say you assumed it would never be published? Like, what was it about this project that you thought it's never going to take off?
Jennifer, Jennifer is the first time somebody's asked me that. I think the reason is because Doug and I were realists. We both had quote-unquote real jobs, and it was a lark to think that we could, I worked in the industry, so I could be certain it would get read by agents, but, they could only get me in the door. And beyond, after that, the book rises or falls on its own merits. And the proportion of people who get accepted by the agent is so small, and then the proportion of the agented books that get accepted is minuscule. And of course, this is before self-publishing. And I think only 1 in 1,000 people is able to make a living off fiction writing. We certainly hoped it would be published, and as we sat around drinking scotch, we talked about, what we do with our 100-foot yachts once we achieved that great pinnacle of success. But in all honesty, it took us 3 or 4 years to write, and then a couple of years to shop it around. So we hoped it would sell, but we thought it was just, we didn't want to have our hearts broken.
Do you both hear Pendergast the same way? Like, if you both hear and see and you develop this character together, how is he different to each of you, or is he?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I hear Pendergast's voice. He has an accent that my brother married into an upper-class New Orleans French family. And there's a peculiar accent in that upper-class stratum of New Orleans society that's a Southern accent, but it's very different and softer and honey-like than your usual Southern twang. And that's the voice that Pendergast speaks in. And I'm assuming that Link has also heard that accent. It's a very rare accent. Not a lot of people have it, but it's mellifluous. It's a beautiful accent. It's soft. It's sort of sensuous. But of course, in Pendergast's mouth, it can become icy cold. I really see him in the same way, because when we're asked who should play Pendergast in the movie, we both come up with the same characters, although none of them quite fit. Wouldn't you say that, Link, that we see him the same way?
I once heard somebody describe an accent as bourbon and buttermilk. And I think that's a pretty good approximation of Pendergast's accent. And to riff on what Doug was saying about actors, we're always asked who should play Pendergast. And of course, as the years go by and this project gets started and then falls by the wayside, and that project gets started but doesn't pan out, the actors we choose age out of the role. People are now suggesting that the person who should play Pendergast, whether it's a boutique TV series or a movie, should be an unknown or an almost unknown. And I think they're probably right.
Well, I'm available.
Okay. It does say man of mystery right over your head. So
Start practicing your bourbon and buttermilk accent now.
Oh, he has to practice that.
Yeah, that's not easy for Canadians.
No, I got my Canadian accent. That's no good. So what happens if you see or write something that the other person doesn't necessarily like? Lincoln, so when Douglas presents something and you're not necessarily sure that that's right. Do you know what I mean? Do you ever have that kind of issue?
We work so closely that we were careful to first get a very rough idea we're both happy with, but we keep it organic and we don't plot out the ending, so it always has a chance to grow and change. And after that is decided, then we will work out a series of a dozen chapters or a 24 chapters, and assign each other a sequence or an arc, or a montage, basically. So we really know where the other one's going most of the time. Sometimes Doug will say to me kind of abashedly, I took a different turn with this chapter, see what you think. Sometimes what will happen is I will go on too long, or what I write is too violent, or is too boring. It can be said in 2 chapters instead of 3. So we're very rarely taken hugely by surprise. I think the only time that has happened is when one of us, for example, there was a case where Doug was finishing one of our Nora Kelly novels, and I went ahead and began our novel Cabinet of Dr. Leng, the previous book to this. So Doug had no idea what was happening until he saw the first 12 chapters of that. And luckily, he liked it. But normally we don't. Normally we work much more closely than that. But there still is a lot of annoyance when the other, we hand it over. I hand it to him and he messes with it. And we make sure that show changes are turned off, no tracking of changes. And we've learned to live with it because we trust each other's judgment.
Now, I'm flabbergasted by the turning the track changes off. That is trust. I mean, I assume you guys didn't start at that point. How's the writing dynamic changed over the past 35 years of writing together?
Lincoln and I got together because he was the editor at St. Martin's Press of my first book, Dinosaurs in the Attic. And so when we started writing Relic, I did most of the writing, of the drafting of the chapters, and then he would rewrite. And of course we plotted together, and Link had many wonderful ideas. But as time went on, Link took more and more of the writing over until now we're about 50-50 writing. So that's, we've settled into that kind of pattern. Link will write a string of chapters from a certain character's point of view. I'll write a string of chapters, and then we swap and we rewrite each other. And that's where sometimes we get into difficulties or annoyances. But we found out really early. I remember when Track Changes first came in, we tried it. And I was enraged when I saw all the changes Lincoln was making to my work, to my deathless prose. And then he was enraged when he saw the changes that I'd made to his prose. And we started arguing about words and adjectives and this word and that word. And very quickly we realized that this was a disaster, that we could not continue that way. And so we use Dropbox, and we basically work on the chapters at different times so we don't get conflicted copies. And we don't know what the other one has done. We can read, their revisions, and we can see the changes were made, but it isn't staring us in the face like Track Changes would. And so we're sort of taking a fresh look at it, and it works much better that way. We have no more conflicts after that, or very few.
Jennifer, I can see how you would be surprised about that. I think that if you were working with somebody on a nonfiction project, you'd probably definitely want to have that on to make sure the other person did not erroneously change a fact or leave something out. But in a novel, it's just, everything is your little darling, and you don't want to see it wrecked. And we had a tough enough time early on getting people to accept the idea that two people could write a novel together. In England, we were published as Lincoln Preston for 10 years. So that now we more or less accept what each other does, because it's a matter of trust. It really is. And respect for each other. And, that's where we're great friends, and that friendship's only grown over the years. And it could have gone one of two ways. We could have gone that way, or we could have gone the way of the Beatles. Not that we're near their level of talent, but egos can't get in the way.
Well, I jokingly, I said this to Alan before, when I interview co-writers, a lot of times I ask them which of them is the Stephen King and which one of them is the Peter Straub. Because they, King and Straub, notorious, both geniuses, but had a very different way of going about things.
Yeah, they wrote that one book together, whatever it was called.
But they couldn't continue because they really they weren't on the same page, literally, figuratively. But Lincoln and I are, in a weird way. I mean, we both, it's happened to me many times. I've sent something into Lincoln, and in the nicest way possible, he says to me, "Doug, this stinks." And, I'm very upset. But I realize that he's right. That's why he's my writing partner. And I've got to swallow hard and just accept it. And we talk about why it's not good and how it could be changed. And that's the way we proceed. But I know with Stephen King and Peter Straub, Stephen King doesn't really revise, and Peter Straub revises, almost obsessively. And that definitely is not. Lincoln and I revise about the same amount. We, probably each one of our books probably goes through what, Link? 8 or 10 revisions? Would you say?
Yeah, I'd say 8, because at least I am so OCD early on that, it gets pretty clean by draft 4 or so. Yeah, and as Doug was saying, sometimes our editor will say, "Oh, I thought this chapter, what a brilliant twist." And it'll be Doug's, and it'll be something that I might have raised my eyebrow at when I first saw it, but left it in. And so, it's just reinforcing the fact that he knows as much as I do, if not more, and vice versa.
So this is book 22 of this series. So what's the premise? What have you got your agent up to now?
Well, it's book 3 in a trilogy that started with Bloodless. And we started Bloodless writing it as a standalone novel, and it really is actually a standalone novel. But at the very end of Bloodless, our character Constance Greene, who is she's a bit crazy. She's a wonderfully complex character, but she's kind of nuts. And she decides to take revenge on a man in the 19th century who murdered her sister. And it involves time travel. So Constance goes back in time to wreak revenge on this Dr. Leng, the serial killer from the 19th century in New York. And Pendergast has to go back in time to try to stop her, or at least prevent her from getting killed, because Leng is a very devious and violent and intelligent character. And then Diogenes Pendergast, who's Pendergast's strange and sometimes evil brother, follows them into the 19th century himself to try to help. He's not really trying to help. He's really just going into the 19th century to amuse himself. So these characters all end up in New York City in the 1880s, and that's sort of the basis of the trilogy. It's a revenge story, and in the end, well, the most brutal and horrific revenge is exacted. But we won't go there because it's a spoiler.
I hope you were both paying attention because there'll be a quiz at the end of the session today.
Yeah, I'm writing
Yeah.
this down.
Yeah, there's a evil brother, a crazy woman, a serial killer, time travel. Got it. Got it.
I hasten to say that this has been this is the climax of a story that's been building and building ever since we wrote a book called Cabinet of Curiosities 10 or 15 years ago, where these characters get introduced incrementally. And, Pendergast is not only out there solving serial murders, but he has this very strange family. Poisoners and mountebanks and carnival barkers and makers of laudanum in the 19th century, and people who were superannuated and have lived far longer than they should. And we realized that it was time for us, and our fans love this, but it's also confusing, as you can see. And so we decided it was time for us to take all this impedimenta and tie off all the loose strings and take all these simmering feuds. And at the end of Bloodless, we had an opportunity to do that. A machine that doesn't go exactly as time travel, but it goes through a parallel time, so we're not messing with our own grandchildren or whatever. But it gave us a chance to put all this family business to rest, and in a satisfying, we hope, way, so that it'll please our longtime readers, it'll intrigue our new readers, and now Pendergast can go forward with solo adventures which take place within the bounds of a single book, which most of them do anyway. But this really is a present to our longtime audience in that regard.
Right. Where do you see it going? Do you have an end in sight with this character, or do you just kind of playing it by ear? Where does that go?
Well, Angel of Vengeance is the end of this trilogy. Everything is wrapped up, hopefully satisfyingly to our readers, because a lot of them complained after the Cabinet of Dr. Leng that we left them hanging on certain things. So Lincoln and I are now working on the next Pendergast novel, but we're going back into one of Pendergast's early cases. So the first Pendergast novel was Relic, which was made into a movie by Paramount Pictures called The Relic. This book is the case immediately before Relic. So it's one of Pendergast's first cases. It's an early case. It takes place in New York City in the 1980s, so before the age of cell phones and the internet. We're having a lot of fun with it. It's a really interesting experience to sort of go back in time to the 1980s instead of the 1880s and write about, cops who have to get on a payphone if they want to call somebody or get on the radio. So we're having a lot of fun with it. And Pendergast is young. He's young, and he's not as sure of himself, but he's still Pendergast.
After every book comes out, people send us emails saying, "Oh my God, is this the end of Pendergast?" Because the books, all conclude with everything wrapped up, and there's never usually any promise of future stories. We're going to keep writing Pendergast until we drop. He's the only character in our books, as I say in the game industry, has a permanent protection, bit set to 1 instead of 0.
In each one of these stories, and in this trilogy even, is there a subtext or a meaning below all the entertainment, even if it came along organically? Well,
there are themes in our books that run deeper than just entertainment. One of the themes is really about science and the misuse of science for evil ends. Another is about justice. Pendergast is a person with a very strong sense of justice, in a way too strong. His brother's a criminal, and, a very, very strong sense of justice verges into revenge. Pendergast understands the criminal mind almost a little too well. And so there's a lot of exploration there between the criminal mind and and the mind of the law enforcement, and the mind of a serial killer and the mind of the person pursuing the serial killer. There's a disturbing correspondence at times there, and we explore that psychologically with Pendergast. And Pendergast himself has said if he hadn't been an FBI agent, he probably would have been a criminal.
He did?
He added that without you knowing, Lincoln.
Yeah. I should have had track changes on at that particular time. Another thing to add to what Doug said is it in the nature of justice is how far you can take justice. Who's going to be able to render that Solomonic judgment? I mean, the thing about Pendergast is that he's notorious for finishing a case but not bringing any of his malefactors to justice because they all end up dead before they go to jail. And, has he overstepped his bounds by doing that or by ending it that way? Who's to say?
So, are you guys set up on social media? Do you have a website? How do you like readers to interact with you?
We do. We have a website, prestonchild.com, and you can email us from the website. We do try to answer most of our emails. Sometimes we run behind. We have a Facebook page with, I think we've got about 100,000 followers on that page, and then we also have a newsletter. This is the best thing we do. If you're willing to give us your email address, we will never give it to anyone else. Once a month, we send out a newsletter. Just once a month. We're not going to start spamming you every day, but with something really entertaining in it. Sometimes we give our newsletter readers a free short story. Sometimes we give them an interview with Pendergast or with some of the other characters, or we give them a preview of an upcoming novel. And if you go to our website, you can click on newsletter and sign up for the newsletter. So I think that the way we really keep in touch is through our newsletter, most of all. We have about 150,000 subscribers.
Okay, so we'll put that up on our website as well. And we're going to say we appreciate you being here and talking about your new book.
We enjoyed it. You asked a lot of good questions.
Oh, thank you.
Both Alan and Jennifer, we appreciate it very much.
Thank you. It's great to meet both of you.
Now, the book is called Angel of Vengeance. Our guests are the writers of that book, Douglas, Preston, and Lincoln Child. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.